Um, Damon Huss is going to do the majority of the presentation. He is the director of the California 3Rs project, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one. That's been around, gosh, about 25 years now. He is also the director of publications for the Constitutional Rights Foundation. And so you can see right now why it's very important that we have both sides, the having the religious understandings, but also the understandings of the constitutional thing when we're talking about teaching these things in school. And so you're going to really be having a very good time hearing Damon and learning from him. Okay, I am Margaret Hill, and at one point for about 18 years, I worked at the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools as the history social science person. And I retired, it's been quite some time now, but I have kept part of that program that I did with the California 3Rs project. I am no longer the director, but Damon has taken that and running with it, and I'm I work with him, but I'm not the honcho. So I am really delighted to see all of you here. The purpose of the California 3Rs project is to guide the community and the education system in how to deal with the diversity of religions and faith groups and non-faith groups in public education. And with all of the things that come up, everything from holidays, especially Christmas is one of them that can get people, very upset. But also, as we've been talking about with the 6th and 7th grade, the curriculum in history social science is very much part of what it helps us. We need the understanding of religion so we can understand the culture and the rationale between how the laws are made and how the society works in other countries, especially those that have a dominant religion that is kind of behind a lot of things. So that's the important part of it. We also are trying to help schools make good decisions when it comes to how they handle everything from holidays or what to do with the parents who come in and like with a Muslim child who now wants to be grown up enough to do the prayers, in the sequence that they do them, but they can't do it at school now because there isn't a place for them to go. This one is an important issue. Other things have to do with PE and those things, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And then if there's an interest, we'll do a second one of these things. Mm-hmm. So Damon, go for it.
Well, thank you, Peg. And you said you're not the honcho anymore, but you're a lot of what, in fact, most of what I'll be talking to all of you about today, I learned from Peg. So she's still my sensei when it comes to 3Rs issues, my own teacher here in what we're learning about today. So I'm really, really honored to be co-presenting today with Peg and talking with all of you. One of the things we were chatting about informally before the presentation began, we were looking at the symbols here, and a couple of things we'll be talking about. One is, Peg's already touched on the issues that we'll be talking about generally, constitutional issues, and also on religious literacy issues. We're not going to focus a lot. We don't have time today to focus on all the religious literacy, the sort of rich cultural knowledge and history that your students are learning about, that you teach about. But this chart here, or this diagram on the first slide here, just kind of symbolizes the rich diversity of religions that are represented, certainly here in in California. So you have Christianity, Judaism, and Hinduism on the top row there. These are symbols that represent these faith groups. And then in the middle row, you have Islam, Buddhism, that's the wheel there, and Shinto, which is a religion from Japan. And then on the bottom row here, you have a symbol for Sikhism, the Baha'i faith, and also Jainism, which is a religion that was that began kind of contemporaneously with Buddhism, roughly in India. And so those are faith groups. Some of them, of course, are dominant or majority faith groups, and others are minority faith groups. In fact, some very small minorities. In fact, we're going to get to that in just a moment. If I can click my slides here. There we go. So the California 3Rs project, as Peg mentioned, it's been around for about 25 years. I'm happy to have been involved with it all the time that I've been, almost all the time that I've been at CRF. I've been at CRF since 2008. And the 3Rs, people often, when they hear about it, they'll say the 3Rs. So you mean religion? What are the other 2Rs? These are the 3Rs. They all encompass not just religion, but also we use, borrowing a term from James Madison, freedom of conscience, which of course would include religion and also secular worldviews as well. And the 3Rs are rights, responsibility, and respect. So this is what we're dedicated to helping you as teachers teach about in your classrooms and to help your students start to value as participants and citizens within American democracy. The rights is a respect for everyone's inalienable rights and their rights to freedom of conscience. Responsibility, of course, is having, recognizing the rights of others and protecting, feeling a duty to protect the rights of others. And respect, which is, this is very much part of the religious literacy component, which is realizing that our different worldviews may disagree with each other, but we still have mutual respect for each other. And for teachers, I was a classroom teacher. I taught middle school for 9 years as well, in both public school and also in religious school, in a private Jewish day school, taught social studies and English. And so it's very important that we realize that even though our religious identities or the way that we identify ourselves may mean we disagree with each other, we still can have mutual respect and create in our classrooms cultures of mutual respect as well. So these are the two major components of what the 3Rs is about, what we teach about. Constitutional literacy, which is so important, and that relates primarily to the First Amendment. And also religious literacy, just knowing about the diversity of faith groups and cultural groups in our communities. It's very, very important. Both of these together are what the 3Rs is about, and they really should be presented together as mutually supporting values in our teaching. So going back to that discussion of majority versus minority religions, just take a few seconds and look at this map. This is a map of course, the United States. And you'll see at the top, it's a map of the second largest religious tradition in each state. And this is based on 2010 census data. I looked for a similar map based on 2020 census data, but I haven't found it yet. But just take a moment. What's something that surprises you or jumps out at you in looking at this map? And you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you could write in the chat area. It's up to you.
It's a large proportion of green and that brownish, yellowish color between Buddhist and Islam, just phenomenally big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of states. It covers between those two faith groups, covers more than half the country. Anyone else want to share anything that jumps out at you or surprises you? one thing I'll point out, notice this is the second largest tradition in each state. And you see in parentheses, as I mentioned earlier, there's a majority religion, and in the United States, that's Christianity. So Christianity remains the largest religious tradition in every state. So this is just showing you the second largest tradition in each state. And so you could look at this map and you could see it and say, I didn't know, that almost half the country was Muslim, or a third of the country, I'm roughly estimating, a third of the country was Buddhist. That's not really what this is showing, but it is showing that in these states, first of all, that Christianity is such a large majority of those who religiously identify as religious, that even very small minority faiths would show up on this map, coloring a whole state. But it does show you the number one, the diversity in the different states. You'll also notice in South Carolina, do you notice South Carolina? That's the one that's colored light blue, and that's Baha'i. And there's a headquarters, the headquarters of the Baha'i faith here in the United States. They have a very large headquarters there. I know also in Illinois there's one, and there are Baha'i people in many states, if not all the states, but there's a large concentration of Baha'i people in South Carolina. And so that's why it shows up here as the second largest. The other thing that this map can show you is some of the history. You can look at this is a reflection of US history. So you'll notice where Hinduism and Buddhism are very prevalent, and that's in the Western states. So in Arizona, Hinduism is the second largest faith group there. And a lot of that has to do with immigration from Asia. So this is along the Pacific coast, in the Pacific Rim. So you have a lot of Asian immigration, especially since 1965 with the Immigration Act in 1965, which lifted a lot of the caps on immigration from Asian countries, and also countries in Latin America and Central America as well. So that reflects large immigrant groups coming in. So you can actually see a lot of history in this map, and does give you a good perspective on the diversity within the United States as well. And you'll see too, with the states where Islam is the second largest religion, a lot of that of course, goes back to history of African-American people, and Islam, bringing Islam to the United States as well. So that reflects, and in the Midwest up here also, that's where there's a large Middle Eastern, especially a state like Michigan, Middle Eastern or immigrants from Middle Eastern countries. So you could see a reflection really of the history of the peoples who have come to the United States here in this one map. So history and religious faith are tied together. The other component we were talking about, of course, is constitutional literacy. And so this is, of course, the First Amendment. And the first clause or clauses of the First Amendment, we have Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so that's really what we're focusing on when we're talking about the history of the history of religion and religion in the United States today. Sometimes these rights might dovetail with freedom of speech. So free speech rights relating to school clubs and people's rights to express themselves. But mostly we're focusing on the religion clauses, which are the first ones here in the First Amendment. Now I say clauses because in this provision there are actually two, which you may have come across if I notice some of you teach US history, and so of course, in teaching about the Constitution, you'll look at these two clauses in the First Amendment. We call them the religion clauses. And the first one, which is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion is, of course, is called the Establishment Clause. And what this clause really does, and the way it's been interpreted over all of the decades, is that it prohibits government from making any law, literally as coming from the amendment respecting establishment of religion. And what that has meant, for the most part, and we'll see how in recent years the Establishment Clause decisions by the Supreme Court have been more in flux. But generally speaking, it means that the government is prohibited from creating or establishing a religion, or unduly favoring one religion over others, or unduly favoring religion over non-religion, or on the flip side, non-religion over religion. Now, just to stay with this just for a moment, that's what establishment means. And the term establishment goes back to the colonial era when different colonies, of course, had established churches. And so there was nothing what at the time that would have been considered bad practice or alarming or out of the ordinary for a state to have a particular denomination that reflected that was reflected in that state's laws or that colony's laws. And even in the early states, in the early republic, a lot of those churches remained established in those states. And over the course of decades, they were disestablished. So you might have, that means that laws would have been passed in different states that would prohibit the government from giving any kind of preferential treatment or funding to any kind of to any one denomination over other denominations. And that was disestablishing a particular church or denomination from that state's government. So that's where the term establishment comes from, and that's why we have an establishment clause. So generally, you might also hear, of course, and most of us have heard the term separation of church and state. This is really what that's reflecting, even though that term, separation of church and state, is not in the First Amendment. That doesn't come from the Constitution. It actually comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut. I believe it was 1804, because the Baptists were in Connecticut were upset about the established church, the Congregational church within Connecticut. And so Thomas Jefferson, in correspondence with them, was supporting them and saying that there should be a wall of separation between church and state. And that's where the term comes from. It actually comes from Jefferson, but it's often associated with the Establishment Clause because it separates and prohibits the government from establishing religion. The Free Exercise Clause is also important. It also prohibits the government from doing certain things, but it's looked at more as it's really a shield for the people, for all of us, to be able to practice and our religion, and whatever religion, religious beliefs we have, or to refrain from practicing, but also importantly to hold on to any religious beliefs that we want to. And the law always separates belief from practice. So you really have an absolute right to believe anything that you want. You can believe any religion, any religious beliefs that you want to. You can also, within legal limits, you can participate in any religious rituals that you want to, or do any religious sacraments or practices, but of course within legal limits. So that means that even though you can believe anything you want, you can't participate in any religious rituals that would violate the law generally. Does anyone have a question? Did I hear someone have a question or no? Feel free at any time. Of course, you can write questions in the chat area, or you can, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that's perfectly fine. So the Free Exercise protects our practices. It also, of course, prohibits the government from interfering with religious beliefs and religious practices. the government can't substantially burden religious practices. Now that's within certain limits. And the government, of course, can't mandate any religious beliefs or mandate that you participate in religious practices. Now, where this has come up, where this comes up in schools, certainly has to do with the Pledge of Allegiance. Now that became a religious freedom issue back in the 1940s. Early in 1940, the Supreme Court decided a case in which some children who were Jehovah's Witnesses they didn't participate in saying the Pledge of Allegiance at the time, and they were disciplined or sanctioned by the school in some way, and they fought it. They took their case to the Supreme Court, and in that time, the Supreme Court said that it is perfectly within the First Amendment's parameters that those students would have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, remember, that was 1940. The Pledge of Allegiance did not include the term under God until 1954. So this had nothing to do with whether or not God is in the mention of God is in the Pledge of Allegiance. This had to do with the fact that in the Jehovah's Witness faith, saluting a flag is a form of idolatry. It's considered blasphemous to actually salute a flag or to make a pledge or an oath to a flag. 3 years later, however, the Supreme Court reversed itself, a case on almost the exact same facts, a different group of Jehovah's Witness children, but the Supreme Court reversed itself and said, actually, in an opinion written by Justice Robert Jackson, it is a violation, really, of the First Amendment, of the free exercise of these students to have to participate in this ritual that violates their religious beliefs. And really, so since that time, students are not required to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And it didn't have anything to do with whether God was in the pledge or not. But that's an example of how the government can't mandate religious practices. That's part of the Establishment Clause, of course, also, is that government can't establish a religion, and by mandating that someone participates in a religious practice, that's a form of establishment. So that's just an overview of the two clauses. One of the things I want to follow up on, though, since I was talking about schools with the cases related to Jehovah's Witnesses, this is why public schools are almost always the locus for each and every one of these Supreme Court cases, these federal cases related to religious practices in schools, because schools are supposed to be, they are secular. And I think, Susie, you mentioned earlier, that sometimes you hear from parents who wonder why you're not supposed to teach any religion in school, in public school. Well, that's not the case. As you mentioned, Susie, also very astutely, you can't teach about anything in social studies without at some point touching on religion or mentioning religion or talking about the historical significance of religion. It is part of the curriculum because it's part of life and it's part of history. But there's a way to do it that still falls within the First Amendment's parameters for inclusivity, for making sure that no student is treated as a second-class citizen based upon their religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs, but everyone's included, and they get the full benefit of a secular education in doing so. But public schools are where it happens. Public school teachers, public school administrators are considered what we call state actors. A lot of the cases relate to someone who acts on behalf of the state, who acts on behalf of the government, is a state actor. And so as a public school teacher, you're a state actor. And so what you do with regard to teaching about religion does make a difference in a way that it wouldn't make a difference if you were teaching, obviously, in like a Catholic school, where there wouldn't be any kind of restriction on teaching the Catholic faith in that school. Or as I mentioned, I taught in Jewish day school. So I didn't teach Judaism, I taught in the secular studies department, but there'd be nothing bad, there'd be nothing forbidden about teaching about Judaism in that context. So what we want to do is we want to make the First Amendment your friend. So the First Amendment is actually good for you as a public school teacher to know how you can teach a fully robust social studies curriculum or language arts curriculum while teaching about religion. And that word about is going to be the most important word I say in this entire presentation. Because that's what you're doing. You're teaching about religion and not teaching religion. So before we move on, I'm just looking here, a note from Susie. They did fourth grade parents, they were Jehovah's Witnesses, wouldn't let their students do mission reports. I see. They did a Jehovah's Witness temple instead, not understanding how missions align with California history standards. Right. That's an example where, yes, teaching California history, you can't teach it without teaching about religion. And so that's why it's so important. This comes from a Supreme Court case in 1863, a very important case, Abington Township versus Shemp. And in this case, very quickly, it was about a school that had broadcast Bible readings and the Lord's Prayer every morning over the intercom system. Students were expected to stand and sort of show some reverence while this was being recited. And so there were Bible readings that were mandated in school. And one student who I think at the time, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was in the 8th grade, it could have been 9th grade, but his family, they were Unitarians at the time. And so he wasn't coming at this from an atheist perspective, although there was a case that was joined with this case that also represented the child of Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was at one time was called, I think, the most hated woman in America. She founded American Atheists. So her case and this case combined, but this young fellow named Shemp, he wouldn't participate in this Bible reading or this ritual within the school of Bible readings. And he was disciplined in some way by the school. The parents were contacted. They fought the case. And it made it to the Supreme Court. And the court decided that no, public schools cannot mandate Bible readings. They can't mandate religious readings from scripture. They can't coerce students into participating into those rituals, but they can't even do it. They can't have these religious, because it's a form of religious ritual and would be considered a kind of religious indoctrination to have this broadcast to all the students. Justice Tom C. Clark said here something that's very important and is still a touchstone for our teaching in public schools today. He said, indeed, whether or not the Bible is involved, it will be impossible to teach meaningfully many subjects in the social sciences of the humanities without some mention of religion. So it's important. It's an integral part of the humanities, social sciences. And of course, it comes up in English language arts, which is part of the humanities. It also comes up, of course, in PE classes, which we can discuss maybe a little bit later, when PE classes might teach yoga, or it also has come up more and more in schools generally with mindfulness meditation programs, which derive originally from Buddhist practices, but like yoga can be made into sort of secular practices by changing terminology, not having any spiritual language associated with it. But there are parents who still object, say, to a mindfulness program saying for example, we have our own religion at home. It doesn't have anything to do with meditation or mindfulness meditation. So you're actually imposing another religion on my child. That's the objection. So you see it comes up throughout the curriculum. But focusing here on social sciences and the humanities is mostly what all of you, and when I was teaching social studies and English language arts, that's what came up for me as well. This is why teaching about religion, of course, is also constitutional. So you're on solid ground, the First Amendment. Remember, First Amendment, shaking your hand, it's your friend. Justice Clark also wrote in this case, nothing we have said here indicates that study of the Bible or of religion, when presented, this is important, objectively as a part of a secular program of education may not be affected consistently with the First Amendment. So in other words, when you're teaching about, and I know some of you teach 6th grade and 7th grade and also 10th grade world history, and I know this is where it comes up a lot, because you're teaching about world religions, you're teaching about many different religions and their origins. That's still part of a secular program of education. And one of the key ingredients to the Establishment Clause analysis that the courts use, of course, is that if you have a secular purpose for what you're teaching, you're already on pretty solid ground. And if what you teach does not either have the primary effect of denigrating religion, does not have a primary effect of encouraging religion, so it's neutral when it comes to religion, then you're also on solid ground there. You have to have a secular purpose. That's clear just in teaching about history. And also you're neutral with regard to religion. You're not trying to promote or dissuade any students from participating in religion with what you're teaching or believing in any religion based on what you're teaching. So you want that neutrality in how you teach your subjects. And how do you do that? You maintain an academic approach. And a lot of the literature and a lot of the resources I'm going to share with you before we're done today focus on that academic approach to religion. And that's what Peg and I do as well in the 3 R's. So when you're teaching about religion in public schools, you want to maintain an academic approach, not a devotional approach. The academic approach is constitutional because it's part of a secular program. The devotional approach is not constitutional because in that case, you would be actually trying to have your students participate in some kind of religious practice. And that is not constitutional. One place where you'll see this, and it's very helpful for you as California teachers, is in the California History Social Science Framework that was adopted in 2016. And there's a whole chapter, there's a whole appendix at the end, which describes a lot of what I've been talking about. These are just excerpts from it, and you'll see they're all variations on a theme, which is that theme I mentioned of having an academic rather than devotional approach to teaching about religion. The school, including your classroom, you need to focus on the academic approach, raising awareness of religions, that religious literacy is very important. As long as no student feels pressure to accept any particular religion or to accept non-religion over religion, as long as they're not being persuaded or pressured in any way by you as a teacher to have any particular opinion about religion, then you're okay because you're remaining neutral. So studying about religion, there's that word about again, you're teaching about religion. Exposing students to a diversity of religious views, especially in their own state and community, so that they're aware of their own community is very important. The school should teach an effort, of course, to teach, so make an effort to teach about all religions, not to promote or denigrate religion. And of course, you want to inform students about various beliefs, and you're not trying to get students to conform in any way to any particular belief. I'm going to share this resource with you when we get to the end. The American Academy of Religion has great resources on this. And religious studies is an important component in social studies. And one thing for you to keep in mind is in teaching about religion, remember these premises of religious studies. And this is again, literally the academic approach was developed in academia, religious studies scholars. And that's to remember religions are internally diverse. So not all Christians are the same. Of course, we know there's a number of Christian denominations. Not all practitioners of Islam are the same, or Judaism, or Buddhism, or Hinduism. There's different sects within each. There's different regional and geographic and cultural origins for different practices. Religions are themselves internally diverse, We also, of course, have a diversity of religions in our society. Religions are dynamic. Their practices have evolved and changed over time with history, with migrations across the world. And so religion takes on that a kind of dynamic character that way. And religions are embedded in culture. So remember, you're teaching religion in the social studies and social sciences and humanities as a part of culture. You're not teaching it as a devotional practice, but it's a part of cultural history. Did someone have a question? Okay. So now we have a couple of hypotheticals which will allow us to talk about some of the, maybe a little more in detail, some of the things I've mentioned. But I want you to just take a look think about what we've talked about, or what I've talked about. And then look at this situation. Just take a moment, read the situation, and tell me what you think. In order to teach about Islam in a high school class, a teacher arranges a field trip to a local mosque. While there, the host at the mosque invites students to observe, the host at the mosque invites students to observe Muslims praying. A small group of non-Muslim students decides to pray with the host. So their host is a Muslim, they're visiting a mosque. He invites them to observe them while they're in prayer, and a small group of students who are not Muslim decide to pray with the host. Would you say it was an advisable practice, first of all, to have to arrange the field trip? Was it advisable to have this happen with the students praying with the host? And I'm looking at the chat area. You can go ahead, feel free to answer there. Stephanie wrote no. Ms. Becker wrote yes to the field trip, but observe only.
I agree. Yes to the field trip, no to the praying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna
Yes.
say yes to the field trip, but no to having the host lead a prayer
Mm-hmm.
or have kids pray.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait,
And I just-
but doesn't it also depend? I mean, they are high school students and they're making their own choice. So how old are they? Do they have to be 18? You know what I mean? I don't know how that, they're high school students. It's not like they're fifth graders. So I would take that with a grain of salt too.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So if you have a student who's a senior in high school, I'm assuming, senior or older grades who's 18, this wouldn't be the same, because once you're 18, by law, you can start making your own decisions with regard to religion and the parents don't have any, they can't have that kind of control over what you believe or how you're supposed to what beliefs you have in the household, for example. Generally speaking, though, even though they're in high school, because again, the school and the teacher is a state actor, they have to abide by those parameters within the First Amendment. I agree with those of you who said, and almost everyone here, I think, or most people said they also agreed, that the field trip is one thing, and a field trip to a mosque by itself is perfectly fine if you're teaching about religion and all of those guidelines we talked about, the diversity of faiths, that kind of thing. Observing the praying, they're just observing. But once the students participate, then it becomes problematic. Now, in this case, the teacher might not have any control over what happens. I mean, depending on how the host, how the event is structured, how the activity is structured. If the students go off by themselves, then the teacher might say, well, I couldn't stop them, or I didn't see it happen. But at the same time, and this is based on something that actually did happen. I think it was in Massachusetts, and I got this case study from the book Faith Ed by Linda K. Wertheimer. She wrote this book, it was a few years ago, describing an incident like this with a public school teacher. And there was many parents who were Christian didn't like the idea that their children were then praying in a mosque. That's not the faith they have at home. That's not the religious practice. So you do have to be careful about students being involved in religious practices. Observing from an, with an academic distance of religious practice happening is one thing, but in this case, the students crossed over into doing something devotional. Now, how much the teacher would be responsible for this is really fact specific and dependent on facts. Whether the teacher encouraged them or not would be very important as to whether or not this would be something that that would mean the teacher was doing something unconstitutional.
Damon,
Go ahead. Yes, Peg.
this one is very tricky from the point of view of the way the mosque and the prayer physically is produced. If, for example, the teacher in this case that you're working here is a female, and it's the students decide to pray, the students are boys, that teacher is separated from those young men at the high school level, who could be thinking, just like all that stuff that you were saying is all true. But if the teacher is held responsible, how do they manage if they're maybe on another floor or in a whole different part of a huge area where people are, the women tend to be in the back part if there isn't a second floor. So those issues become very tricky. And that's why if you were going to do a field trip, you need to take very close observance yourself before laying yourself out for it. And the experience I've had with taking teachers to Muslim centers is what really they are, because there's a temple or a mosque, but there's also a school, and there's also outreach things for the community. Like so many religious institutions that serve immigrants, it tends to be that kind of thing. But in other words, one of the things to be careful of when you're taking students to a religious institution, you need to have checked it out yourself beforehand so that you are ready and planning, and let the students know that the reason you wouldn't want them to do that is because it would be a separation, and they'd need the permission from their parents before they could do that sort of, the prayer themselves. So it just, those are the kinds of things that you get smarter about once you make mistakes, is really what happens, like a lot of teaching is.
Right, and that's really important, just to emphasize. Preparation before doing something like this is really, really important, so that not only are the students aware of the academic purpose of it, but that your host would also be aware of the academic purpose. So it's not just, hey, well, now we have a field trip, let's just go on the field trip, and no one's really been primed so that everyone's on the same page as to what the purpose for the field trip is. I think that's key. And so the guidance that we have here, that based upon our examples so far, teachers, administrators can't lead prayers. Using religious artifacts in teaching is okay if it's, again, presented as part of an academic purpose. There should be no simulations of religious practices in your classroom. This is not even going on a field trip, but even within the classroom, students who might be doing some simulation of a religious practice well-meaning, in order to, understand what, as a teacher, there might be well-meaning, and I want my students to know what the religion's about. But once students start participating in a simulation, then that crosses over into being unconstitutional. Then it's no longer an academic purpose. And the example here, this goes back quite a ways, but there was a teacher in California who, during the month of Ramadan, for extra credit, allowed her students to, so that they would know more about Islam, to fast during the daylight hours as Muslims do during Ramadan. It was extra credit, so no student had to do it, but and it didn't result in a major case, but it did result in a PR issue for the teacher and for the school, because that's actually, it seems like a simulation, but it's an actual religious practice. And so students were actually participating in an Islamic practice, which they shouldn't be doing as part of their curriculum. Peg mentioned there might be Muslim students who need, maybe have certain accommodations for prayer or certain accommodations for fasting. That's totally different. That's a very different issue. That's not a simulation of religious practice. That's actual adherents of the religion who need some kind of accommodation if they can have an accommodation for it. But just generally having students participate, that would be like saying, to understand Christianity, we're going to have a simulation of Eucharist with bread and, we wouldn't be wine, but be grape juice or something to like symbolize Christian practice. Well, then it's a simulation, quote, but they're actually participating in a ritual. And so nothing should look like something that's an actual religious practice. For anything that's done, say, even like a yoga class, for example, opt-in is better than opt-out. So having something, for this teacher doing it as extra credit, at least she took that step. It wasn't perfect, but at least the step is there's no requirement that students participate in something that may be offensive to their religious beliefs or to the religious beliefs in their household. Also, of course, use academic sources. You always want to check publishers and authors. University presses are usually good, but you want to check and make sure that any kind of supplemental resources that you're using don't just represent one particular religious group. And everything should be done, of course, with an academic purpose. Now, we're not going to have time to go through all of our simulations, but let's take a look at this one. When studying the subject of immigration in US history, students learn about many Catholic immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. The teacher asked students to do a quick write about how their own religious identities and beliefs compare with those of the immigrants that they're studying. Would you say that's an advisable practice? Is that an advisable assignment to give them that quick write? And if not, why not? And if so, why so?
That's kind of touchy because it doesn't take into account whether some students don't have a religion. They might not have a religion at all.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that they all have a religion.
Excellent point. Yeah. So first of all, the way I phrased it here, and so you take it, the way I phrased it is, right, you shouldn't assume that students have religious beliefs. First of all, don't assume that they all do. Anything else? Is there anything else in this that jumps at you as not advisable, ill-advised? Let's see here. Right, assuming that religion is practice, that's true. Generally, as a teacher, I wouldn't want to ask students or elicit from students to talk about their own religion, if they do have religious beliefs, to talk about that for an assignment. I think if students bring it up, say if they're in discussion, they want to talk about it, it's their right to do that. Schools are secular, but they're not. It doesn't mean that everyone just wipes clean their identities when they come into the school. They no longer subscribe to their religious beliefs when they're in the school. No, they still have them. They can discuss them. But as a teacher, I would refrain from eliciting that from the students. Hey, would you talk about or would you write about your religion right now? If a student chooses to do that as to answer some question, that's their right to do it. And as long as it's, on task, then that's good. Then that means then they're answering an academic question or a discussion question or something. They can bring it up, but it should be the student's choice in that case. So some of these Peggy, you can jump in here if you'd like to as well. But the guidelines pertaining to this, of course, we want to be very careful in the language that we use related to religion and religious symbols. So avoid absolutes. Number one would be, as Hugo brought up, avoid assuming students are religious. Avoid absolutes, like all Buddhists believe such and such. Now, there are some, of course, beliefs that are common to all, to Buddhists, most Buddhists, or Christians. There's certain very broad kind of things that might be general, but I would err on the side of avoiding all of those absolute statements, because there are many different sects of Buddhism, just like Christianity and Judaism as well, and other religions. Use attribution. So this is why learning about religions and having basic religious literacy is important. So Theravada Buddhists, we're talking about Sri Lanka. You can talk about specific practices rather than generalizing that Buddhists all believe something that really may only pertain to a percentage of Buddhist adherents. Use the word story instead of myth when talking about religions. Story, some people have said, well, that sounds that might be sort of demeaning too. Well, no, because you could have true stories, you could have fictional stories, but the point is we're avoiding talking about religion as myths, because what may seem mythical to some people, of course, are not mythical to other people. The word myth should be avoided, and talk about religious stories, because stories do come out of religious culture. And avoid we, they language. Well, we in the United States believe this, whereas in Iran, they believe that, or something. Saying we, assuming that all of your students are all on the same side, or on the same identity. You want to avoid that kind of language, because you want to make sure that you're inclusive for the diversity of students that you will likely have in your public school classroom. Anything you want to add here, Peg?
No, all I would give is an example. So, and you did fine.
Okay. Do we have time for one more? I know we're coming up on 5 o'clock here.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, it's 5 o'clock now.
Mhm.
Well,
we
I
do
can-
have, we can keep it going, because I made the session go to about 15 more minutes. We have. If we-
okay. But I know that I think it was between 4 and 5. So what I can do is I can share these slides with you as well, if you want to take a look at them. And I want to put some links in the chat. This says situation 4. I think as I put them out of order, there might have been 4 before. So it's really, we skipped situation 3, or it disappeared. Anyway, to teach about American Indian history, a teacher invites a Native American spiritual leader from a local religious organization as a guest speaker. The speaker requests that they will recite a blessing for the classroom and students before they begin speaking to the students. So this is somewhat similar to the mosque situation that I described before. Would you say it's advisable to have this guest speaker and to allow them to recite a blessing with the students?
I agree with Ms. Becker. It is. The students are not being forced to participate. They're observing the general practice which the Native American spiritual leader is leading.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Well, in this case, I think we need to think back to that mosque setting situation and think about the importance of preparation and making sure that everyone's on the same page. In teaching about Native American spirituality, Native American religion, and Stephanie writes here, no, it's in class, keep a distance. Yes, and I think the way you do that here in this case would be just to make sure, if you're going to have that guest speaker, if it's going to have, of course, first of all, make sure it's part of a secular purpose, teaching about Native American spirituality or Native American history, maybe history of a local tribal organization, something like that. And make sure that your guest speaker, talk to them beforehand. Make sure that they're on the same page with you, that this is for an academic purpose. If it's very important to your speaker that they say this blessing, they just can't do it in the presence of the students. If they want to do it before the students come into the classroom, that's fine. You're respecting, you're respecting their religion, their request, but you have to make that really educate them too, that the students, they're diverse, and because this is a public school, we really have to make sure that the students are only having an academic experience and they're not involved in any kind of devotional practice. And that's what it would be. It would be the same if a priest was invited to the classroom to talk about the history of a local religious group or the history of Christianity in some way. They couldn't say a blessing or a prayer with the students in that case either. They want to do something before this, outside the presence of the students, that's different. So just make sure that your guest speakers, your hosts for the field trip, make sure that they know what your purpose is and that it's academic.
I would like to add something here. There have been a number of situation things with Native Americans who have objected to the way a classroom teacher is working with their students. And one of the areas that really was quite explosive, at least in this region, was that the students and the teacher were performing dances that were sacred dances to the Native people, and therefore part of their the secret part of their spiritual aspects. They were not things that were done, were taught to non-Native folks. And they were things they were watching a performance or something like that. And then just, there were no prayers, there were none of the structure around it. So part of what we're seeing with the Native American people is a very public but sacred set of traditions. Some of them are the songs, some of them are the dances, some of them are the stories. And so as you're working, is especially true in the elementary grades where a lot of that is being done with the students. So you have to be very careful to explain the differences. It's not the same as going to, watch somebody else sing something. It's a sacred thing and it's a private thing. And so just being sensitive to it would be very helpful. So you could show something that's been approved by the Native Americans in your region to use. I know we've done this in the Southern California, in the San Manuel area. They've been very strong in doing that. And if they just get permission and that it's not going to be abused, it's so that the students can learn. And that effort to learn is very important.
Dr. Hill, I have a question. I might even make it like another situation here. I work for Hemet Unified School District. In our district, fourth graders are usually taken to the Ramona pageant. This California outdoor play. Mm-hmm. In that play, they do Native American dances, do performances, including some prayers during that. Would this be an issue? Very similar to what we're talking about here in some of these situations, or is that something different? Is this a complete and total performance by actors, including some of them are Native leaders, some Native dancers, local Native population that participates in this outdoor pageant?
Yes, and it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I didn't have that top of my mind. I think it's one of those tricky ones. So I think having the teachers write up what it is that they're doing, why you're doing it, and that these things might be things that the students don't understand, or that it's not something, we're not trying to persuade anybody in these spiritual ways. It kind of depends on the language that's where it's happening. In other words, will any of the students be able to understand the words that are being sung and the processes, what constitutes a prayer? Sometimes you don't know, but just being on the up and up with the parents about it, that helps us really understand our neighbors, because these Native peoples are our neighbors, and respect their beliefs is what we're trying to establish, and understand what America was like in the early period, and now we have a whole new period of rebirth, really, of Native American culture in our region, at least. So that would be what I would do, I think, is just, and if a student can't do it, if there's an alternate thing they could do by reading about it or something like that, that would be fine. Does anybody else have something to critique what I just said? That's not the only answer, but.
Well, with the Ramona project, isn't it really part of local history as well? And you're teaching it as a local history, and it's an actor portraying something within that. So it's like you're watching somebody watching it. I think it's once removed. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think it is in a lot of circumstances, but he was saying that a number of the actors this year are members of the group that's being portrayed. That's the part that was making it different.
Part of the reason our district takes fourth graders who see the Ramona pageant, it's a dry run for the pageant before it opens up. They take the fourth graders and they're studying the missions, are studying history. So they take our fourth graders at our district to see I think also San Jacinto Unified School District takes them as well. Indeed, as a kid growing up in Hemet, I was actually part of the pageant, and it's tradition that we have around, and the majority of population that portrays Native American population are Native Americans from our local groups.
Okay, I just think you'll be in good shape if you let the parents know that this is what will be, part of the deal, because they, with the way Californians move around, you've lived there a long time, but a lot of people, it's been really growing. So you'll have people that don't know much about it, and it would be helpful for them to know.
Well, these are some of the guidelines. Some of that relates to that. Having speakers that had to do, of course, with field trips that we talked about before, but having try to have religious studies scholars or historian speakers would be great. People who can definitely talk to the academic approach to about religion. Sometimes, of course, clergy members might also be scholars, and academics related to religion. That's fine, but just be careful for the reasons that we've discussed in having them present lessons about religion. And I mentioned here, again, not to ask students about their religious beliefs. Don't put them on the spot in any way, remind them to talk about their own religions. They can choose to, if they want to, and if it's, if it's part of the academic program. Here, there are webinars. There's some American Academy of Religion scholars. I don't know the status of these webinars, but those might be available. I don't know the status of those webinars. And remember that important principle, we talked about those three premises, speaking of the American Academy of Religion, those three premises of religious studies. One of them is, of course, that religions are dynamic. And that's what this means. Their beliefs, and especially their rituals and the social expression of religion, can also change over time. This is important for those of you teaching world history, and especially in 6th and 7th grade, to understand that this idea of religions as dynamic. And there's an example here that Peg included as well, which is the need to remember that even something like the concept of Christian is fairly recent, meaning between the 16th and early 20th century, people primarily identified themselves with what their sect was, what their denomination was. And of course, there were religious wars in Europe, which is part of the reason why there really was a First Amendment included in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights, because the founders wanted to try to avoid the religious wars that had happened in Europe that were quite bloody. You know, there was the 30 Years' War and others. And so to avoid those concepts or those, to avoid that, they developed this concept of the concepts that we have in the First Amendment. That's just an example of the dynamism of religion. So with that, what I want to do is finish here for the 3 R's project. The overarching goal, of course, is that we all live and understand our deepest differences in public schools. So we can live with our deepest differences, because sometimes religious differences are the deepest differences. They're the way that people that identify themselves in a very deep way. And we can actually live with those differences. There are ways to do it. The First Amendment is something that actually helps us be able to do that through the 3 R's, through understanding and knowing our own rights, a responsibility for others, and respecting the rights of others and respecting the identities of others as well. These are our emails here, and what I'd like to do is also drop in the chat area some links for you. There we go. Here's the California 3 R's Project website. So I'll drop that here for you. On here are many resources that we've compiled over the years, and we're putting new ones on here as well. So this is where you'll find lessons on different religious traditions. So there's religious literacy as well as constitutional literacy lessons that you'll see here. There's a lot of materials from CRF. I'm happy to and proud to have been involved in. In fact, I'm going to share some of these with you here in the chat area as well. This is a lesson specifically on the free exercise of religion. We have a number of lessons on the Establishment Clause. We have this lesson on the history of free exercise of religion in the United States. And I mentioned, this one's great. This is the American Academy of Religion. So they have a guide for teaching in K-12 schools. And I've learned a lot from it over the years, a lot from the American Academy of Religion, and Dr. Bruce Grelly, who's also an advisor and part of the planning committee for the 3 R's 3 R's project. I've learned a lot from him, of course, over the years too, about the premises of religious studies. There's a guide on this page, which is a PDF guide, which has a lot of similar kind of situations, similar to what I included in our slideshow here, which will help you, of course, understand. And I'm just going to mention this as well. This Saturday at CRF, we're having a mini conference at our offices, which are in Los Angeles. They're in Koreatown. And we're going to have, it's us and the Center for Civic Education and the LA County Office of Education. We're going to have a number of breakout sessions, half days, the mini conference in the morning. We're serving breakfast and lunch, and there are stipends available, all in the theme of the California State Seal of Civic Engagement and how you can help students earn that seal. Of course, teaching about religion and students learning about religion and the diversity within our society is part of civic education. Since we're a civic education organization at CRF, the 3 R's is an integral part of civic education as well. But you're all invited to come. It's free to you, and there are stipends available to our participants if you'd like to join us on Saturday. But with that, I'm going to leave our emails up here again. And I want to thank you all, first of all, for being here, for your participation. I liked our discussions and the back and forth with the chat, and also our discussions. I also learn a lot from teachers, of course, whenever I give one of these presentations about what's happening in your classroom, what's happening with your students. And I appreciate that. And I also want to, of course, thank Peg and the Inland Empire Council for the Social Studies for inviting me and allowing me to speak today as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damon. We learned a lot, and we already know quite a bit here in this house, but you added some wonderful nuances to things. And this is the most nuanced content area that I can think of. It's always how you do it as much is equal in value to understanding the establishment and the free exercise clauses. It's how you do it where people don't become upset about something and at the same time become fascinated with the differences and the similarities of what they're learning to what they understand. So it's cool. Thank you. What we're going to try to do is keep a copy of this chat. And if there are questions or things that we weren't able to get to, we will be able to email you back with things. It's a smaller group of you that's left here, but is there an interest in going like a step 2 with this, or did you learn all you needed?
I say we go step 2.
I agree.
Okay. What would you like as part of step 2? Can I trust you to email me and Damon? Or
Case studies are I was fascinated. I kind of wanted to go on with more case studies. I know we're limited on time, but those kind of, they get right to the dirt of it all. So.
Okay. All right. More case studies. That we'll think about that. We started off with Damon had written several, and I had some in my mind, and we knew we had to get down to 3 or 4, or we'd be here all night. So
Yeah, and the thing is, there's no shortage of case studies.
no.
I read about every year. I read more about, and they're all some of them are repetitions, but there's so many new ones that come up. That just incidents that happen in schools, First Amendment concerns in schools that are related to religion. It's amazing. So yeah, there's no shortage there.
What I would like to see, if we do another one, possibly tie today's political climate and religion to the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd get quite a bit out of that as well.
Yeah, and of course, we just 2 days ago there were oral arguments at the Supreme Court. There's a new decision that they'll be handing down probably in June related to prayer in schools. There was the case related to the football coach who was praying after a game, and then students joined him, and so that became the basis of this case that the Supreme Court heard on Monday. And it's widely predicted that because it was pretty clear before, the Supreme Court had come up with pretty clear parameters for when a prayer can happen, and how the school should be restricted in, of course, leading prayers or even facilitating prayers. But now there's been a change in certainly in the last 20 years since the last decision that I could remember specifically about prayers at sporting events, change on the court. So we heard some oral arguments, and so we'll see what happens in June, but it's widely predicted that there's going to be a decision that's probably going to give more latitude to the coach who was leading the prayer after the game. But we'll see. I mean, sometimes you never know, and it could be a plurality decision where the justices agree with each other on some things and disagree on other things. I don't know, but
Nancy Noble's name came up. Are you still there, Nancy?
Yes.
Good.
hi, Nancy.
Hi.
You have a question or something to say?
No, I've just been listening and enjoying it.
Good, good. Okay. So I think we've done, I know we've used our time plus. So I appreciate all of you hanging in there that extra amount of time.
Thank
And
you so much.
I'm looking forward to working with you again. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, it's in the thing right there. Now, have we got a copy of the chat?
It should be in the recordings, yes.
Okay. So I can close it, or we don't, are we gonna cut it, do a cut and paste?
I've been doing that. Yeah,
Okay, all right,
I hope it works.
I do too. Thanks, Damon, very much appreciated. And I think, you know, we might have the possibility of doing this by talking to, I don't know, maybe Michelle, when you see her tomorrow, to see if she would be interested in having us use the same structure. Or maybe some of the Northern California county offices of ed would be interested in it. But it seems to be something that draws people in once they're there. If we can get them there, they seem to be hanging. We didn't have very many people step out because I was looking at our participants.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. I don't think anyone who came, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but didn't seem like anyone left, which is,
I was watching it to see
Yeah.
how many
we're
went
ahead.
away so that we could decide when we had to quit. You know, so,
yeah,
and mostly they didn't until it got to be after 5.
yeah.
I had another example. I had a high school teacher when I was his administrator. His wife was also a teacher, an elementary teacher. And they were both Native Americans, and their children in 4th grade did making a Kachina doll.
Mhm.
Well, she's a Hopi Indian, and that is a religious practice in the Hopi
Mhm.
world, which nobody knows except the Hopis. And so there's all kinds of examples of that kind of thing where an activity is actually somebody's religious practice. So the more you know about the religion, the better off you are.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah. Well, it's funny, there was someone, sometimes I feel like, I don't know if I don't know. I feel like sometimes I've erred on the side of being more restrictive, you know, because of course teachers need to be careful. But I remember there was someone in one session years ago who mentioned, I tell my students, you know, I think they were teaching world history or something, you know, and I tell my students at certain times they need to be quiet, you know, so you need to be as quiet as he either said quiet as monks, maybe, something like that. As quiet as you might have even said, is it the Cistercian monks who have vows of silence or something. Anyway, I remember thinking like, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that just because you're having students, then you're sort of making what they're doing sacred. And all of a sudden, or it's a simulation, you know, kind of thing. But I don't know. I mean, it also seems like that's kind of a creative thing for that teacher to do and say, you know. But sometimes I just feel like I'm more, I don't know if I'm killjoy or not, but you know what I mean?
Everybody who's messed with this stuff in schools with a lot of people in different school districts, and you just have seen so many cases where generally teachers are very innocently getting in deep trouble and sometimes fired because they have no idea they violated something.
Yeah.
I remember an argument that Peg was having years ago with social studies school service, the guy there, I forget his name right off the top. They were selling a commercial kit of a pilgrimage of Ibn Battuta across Africa in the 14th century or something. And because it was a Hajj, whoops, that was religious practice.
Right.
He was very upset. And Peg kept saying, all you have to do is take the Hajj out and make it just a trip across Africa in the 1400s and you're clean.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he was, no, he was very Jewish and he was very upset that somebody would take umbrage at, this Muslim Islamic thing.
Well,
Oh,
they-
well.
The thing that really sent me into orbit is he had the students designing and producing a prayer rug. And then
Oh,
and then they would simulate it.
Yeah.
That was the thing that sent me into orbit.
Oh,
The
yeah.
other one
Yeah.
wasn't quite so bad.
It wasn't as bad as that, yeah.
But he said,
yeah.
"Well, it's just a piece of art, it's not a big deal." I said, well, it is to those guys.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. That's what's so funny is I know, people might think that they're being a little more sort of like, I guess, cosmopolitan or something. I don't know. But it's like, yeah, but that's actually a religious artifact. It's actually infused, charged with, some kind of divine essence or power or whatever.
And then when you had the students using it and so that they could match the way you sat and leaned forward with your head on the ground and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, then
Yeah.
there was nothing to say that you were doing the right thing there.
Right. Right. Right.
It was amazing because he was really mad at me. He just-
I'm gonna go put the
Wow.
potatoes on and start.
so anyway, it was great fun. to
Thanks,
work.
Jim.
See you, Damon.
And actually, I feel pretty good today. When we worked together before, I was sort of a zombie. So.
Oh, yeah. How are you feeling now?
Well, I got finally a specialist, and they took some of the pressure off my eardrum, which helps a lot. So it's only pressured from one side instead of both sides.
Mhm.
It was, anyway.
Yeah.
But he wants to do what he wants to do, and I have to do that. They're going to put a hole in the eardrum.
Mhm.
There's another one already with a hole, but it may have closed up by now. I don't know.
Mhm.
But what I want to say to them, we aren't going to do this unless you figure out why there's fluid over and over again in my inner ear.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the part that's causing the problem. Why don't we work on that one?
Mhm.
The cause rather than just draining it all the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but anyway, I
Well.
approved that one, but I'm still going to say it.
Yeah. Well, I hope that gets better
I do
soon.
too, because with that, see, it causes me to be at lack of equilibrium and
Mhm.
so I've been falling.
Yeah.
That's for an old lady like this that you don't know. Try not to fall down because it's rather dangerous. So I'm trying to keep
Yeah.
all my limbs, operating and that stuff.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a guy who's about 20,
Well,
28, so he didn't quite connect that part, I don't think.
yeah.
But anyway, take care and
Thanks again, Peg. Yeah.
Okay, and I hope we can work again soon. We'll think about that, business of wanting to do it again or do a part two, however you're thinking.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. And I'll get in touch with you probably within the next week or so about, or next few days about dates for our proposed meeting.
Okay. That'd be fine.
Alrighty.
Good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peg.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Ian.